Hello and welcome to Rainmakers, Startup Businesses. My name's Ken Bryant. I'm a local businessman here in Louisville, Kentucky.
And Jerry Mudd.
And we're going to talk a little bit today about sales projections, and inventory review. They say sales is the business to businesses what oxygen is to breathing. It's a very important part of the business. And I'm going to ask my friend Jerry here, with his 90 years of experience, or is it more?
About that.
Okay. Some questions that'll help any small business owner or someone thinking about getting into business that would be beneficial. I'm going to start in the sales genre here, talking what is sales and why is it so important?
Okay. Before we start there, I want to backtrack on last week. You know, in the podcast that we're doing is primarily for startups, and so it's kind of dribbling along at the startup stage, not someone that's already in business, has a business, or so on. As we go further, we're going to jump back and forth to the categories and subjects that we talked about. And in this case, again, we talked about culture, and we talked about how important culture was. And, you can't write it down. You can't necessarily see it, and it's not something you're going to read about in a book. It's something you have to develop. And the main thing is there's 2 or 3 words that I thought about since last week, and we discussed it, and that's truth, honesty, and opportunity to grow. And basically, if you can offer that with the employee and give them that kind of respect that we've been talking about, it will really help to build the culture. Now we'll start on sales.
Can I interrupt you 1 second?
Sure.
There? Please, if you are watching this and that you're interested, please hit the subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. And we're open to any email questions that you might have, and we can address some of those email questions moving forward.
Take what you like and leave the rest. Okay, sales. And again, we're talking startup. So if somebody's listening and they have a business, they'll say, well, okay, that sounds a little, maybe, you're crawling here a little bit, but we're really not, because someone that has a startup business, they're focusing on what they want to do, how they want to do it, and for the most part, never have done it or had very little experience in doing it. So we're starting at the startup stage. And a lot of times when people start a business, they have a product, they have an idea, or a service. And they don't really focus on where am I getting the customer, what does sales really mean, and again, we're also talking about inventory, so I can mesh a little bit. And if you're talking about something you're selling or inventory that you need in order to produce the sale, that's going to kind of mesh in what we're talking about this evening. The first thing that we sit down when we work with somebody that has a startup business and they're ready to roll it out, they're going to open their LLC or an S Corp, they're going to get the proper insurances. But the thing that they really need to do is to have what I call, in layman's terms, a roadmap. How long does it take me to get to Indianapolis? How much gas? How many stops? How many hours? How many miles? So basically, what you're doing here, we need and a lot of ideas come up. Well, do a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan. If you go so far out, it becomes what I would call worthless in the most part. And there's our train. There's our train. Thank God we got stock in Union Pacific. He's our sponsor that's paying for all this. And as they go by, that's why they always blow the horn. Our friend is the conductor. We started in the business several years ago, as you know, and now he's part owner of Union Pacific. Oh, okay. So here we go. Sales. This is something that the entrepreneurial startup business person doesn't have the knowledge, doesn't want to do. These aren't fun things. And to get the business off the ground, you got to do things that, you got to do the fun things that excite you, but you also have to learn the discipline to do things that you don't necessarily want to do, but you need to do them to run the business. That's the tough side of following through and getting the business up and running. What you need to do is we always start with, I call it a 1-year plan. We're talking sales, we do them bi-monthly. We project out for the next 12 months. Doesn't have to be calendar year. Maybe you're starting your business right now in October, November. And so you're going to start that the first 12 months. Is it seasonable? Is it a continuous product? Or is it a continuous service? Is it weather oriented? So these are all things you take into account. You sit down and discuss that with the person that's doing the startup business. And if we're talking about sales, revenue, how much you're going to do the first month. Also, where you're going to get the customer. You know, it's like automatic that most people who start a business never really think about where in the heck the customer's going to come from, and they just completely bypass that for whatever reason. I don't know.
Can I mention something there, Jerry?
Sure.
You have, it's interesting you say that, because I was taking notes here. It's early on, especially when you're starting up. I know, you know, from my experience, that you have limited resources. It's maybe you and just a couple other people. And early on, I was doing the sales. You know, we had one customer. By the end of the year, we had 53. You know, and that's just cold calls, calling people, and doing all that work. But you have to be willing to do some of those things, because you just don't have the resources to go out there and hire somebody to be your salesperson.
Good statement, and all that's true without any exaggeration. You got to do it all. Not only do you have to go out and knock doors, and you got to be willing to put up with the rejection. Be willing to do what you don't want to do, because nobody wants to go out cold call on someone. And I'm talking about physically cold calling. Now, it could be different variations of how you're going to find that customer, approach that customer. It could be email, it could be Facebook, it could be a website, and so on. But the real down in the trenches, the way you're going to get this customer, in a lot of businesses, you know, you're going to steal the customer from somebody. If you start a lawn service and you go into a subdivision and you're going to start up cutting grass, and there's a lot of people that have startup business, and then they go deeper into landscaping and so on. Basically, you know, what I tell them, go up, knock on the door and say, you know, I'm starting a business, here's my truck, I'll be willing to do a job for you. Oh, I cut my own grass? Well, I'll do it for $30. You might have to buy in to that. And also, the person that has a service may not be happy with them. But you might find yourself initially undercutting to buy into that business. I call it just stealing the business and creating. But ideally, that's what works. The landscaping, cutting grass thing is something that, you know, I've worked with several people over the years and starting them up in the landscaping, grass cutting business. That's a perfect example. You really have to get in the trenches, go in and dig in, find out where the customer is, how to communicate with that customer, and offer and practically beg sometimes to get that service. If there's also a lot of businesses that you may be in, you may find that they're throwing out customers. You know what their negative point is, and you might be able to get a customer's list, an email list, or names of the company. I could go on, but that's a definitive way. You've got to hustle. You've got to project the sales, and the sales are determined by how much you think the average price of an individual job would be, sale, or an inventory piece that you're selling, and you're just going to run that out through monthly, and then some months may be better if it's a summer type business where warm weather helps. Then obviously it's going to drop down in the winter months. So you got to figure that my sales may be down in the cold months, but way up in the summer months, or spring and summer. So all this has to be taken into account. Not only do you project out the sales, you've got to project out the expenses. The cost of each line that would appear on a profit and loss statement, which would be lights, heat, rent, employees, insurance, loans, whatever it might be.
Let me mention one thing that kind of jogged my memory when you were talking there with sales. I remember we had a customer that I was trying to get and tried for a long time, and we predominantly do erosion control for new home construction or developers and that kind of thing. Is the black silt fence barrier goes around construction sites? You might have seen that. We do the majority of that here. And this one builder was, didn't want to, really wanted to do that kind of thing, but he had a need for screwing down subfloors. So he says, "Hey, do you screw down subfloors?" No. But I told him, "Yeah, absolutely, we do that." So I'll be glad to do that. So you can kind of get a foothold there. Then he got in some trouble, but the builder got in some trouble with MSD on some water, some dirty water that got off on the site. We came in there, we took care of it, and that was one superintendent and one development. And by the year's end, we had every one of their developments. So you don't know how it's going to turn out, but sometimes if you offer them something that they need at that time, you might get what you need in the long term. So that's just one example on our part.
Sales come from where you least expect it sometimes.
Yeah, you don't know. I mean, how it's going to turn out. I got several questions here, Jerry. I'm trying to look for one here that you haven't mentioned here. What is the most important part of sales?
Well, you can make sales and not make any money. You don't want to you don't want to trade dollar for dollar. Although starting up, your expenses shouldn't be that great. Also, you might have to undercut the competition, but without sales, you don't have a business. So there's your answer. You need to focus as much on sales as you do what's got you to this point. And a lot of entrepreneurial people, they have great ideas, and they're really cutting edge ideas because they're fresh in their mind. They approach it completely different from the people that are already in the business. But one thing they don't approach is the sales. So without sales, lay down, take two aspirin.
I remember when we were starting off, and then I have a saying I like to tell our folks all the time: if you're not growing, you're dying. You've got to constantly be growing, got to constantly be going up. And we had a point. I said, let's just look at it like those sales are constantly growing, and our debt is constantly coming down. And at some point, the gap gets larger and larger, and that's kind of where we ended up at the point, because we were full in, especially during the 2007 recession. It was hard for everybody, but you slowly kind of did that over time. And but again, if you're not adding to your sales, because you're probably losing one or two in some cases, you got to constantly be adding to those sales.
Along that, before you ask the next question,
go ahead.
I always use this as a reference. Historically, what happens if you have 10 customers, annualized customers, for some reason they're subscription customers, or they're customers that are on a continuous basis. So hopefully you have a business where everything is not one and done, because that's a tough business to grow. But if you have 10 customers, you're going to lose 2 of those by just human nature. For whatever reason, they don't pay, they sold the business, they don't like your service, or whatever reason, but you have to know every year, based on 10, you're going to lose 1 or 2 customers, and you have to anticipate that. And you know, it could be low-lying fruit on the tree that really doesn't add much sales or volume, but you will lose approximately 10 to 20% every year, as a rule.
So let's say your business is rolling okay, doing all right and everything else, and you're going to maybe look for a salesperson. So what do you look for in a salesperson? How do you think they need to be compensated?
Well, again, we're talking startup business. We're not talking a business that's 3, 4, 5 years or older. You know, I always use the analogy, meat on the hoof or steak on the plate. At this point, I've got to hire some, what I call raw talent, meat on the hoof. Yes, they're cheaper, so what, you know, than somebody that has all the experience. Now, I'm not saying that I wouldn't want to hire the person with the experience, because maybe they'll bring a customer base in with them and they have the knowledge. But, you know, like a lot of business, you just got to crawl, walk, run. And the best way that I would say is somebody, again, good question, back to the culture. I'm going to bring them in, tell them what our goals are for the company. I would like for them to start up. They're an integral part of a startup business. As a company grows, they're going to grow. And they also have an opportunity to make more money. And as long as they do what they perceive is the right thing to do, along with what the company culture and sales projections are, or goals, they're going to grow. And you can offer that to people, and obviously you've got to develop these people. My experience when I've hired this kind of person, they always end up to be the most loyal and dedicated person, and the one that adds tremendous value to the company, as opposed to going out and hiring what I say, steak on the plate.
Okay, you want to talk a little bit about sales projections? Let me kind of mention and you critique us how you like.
Okay.
So we have a 10-year plan, we have a 5-year plan, and then we have year plans. So every year towards this time of the year, we're starting to think about what the economy looks like for next year, what's our sales, what's our builder telling us that it looks like, not looking real good, but so you're trying to look at and doing that. And then we try to say, okay, so if this is the number we think we can obtain, what do we need to do in the business or add to the business to get to there?
Okay. You mentioned 1, 5-year, and 10-year. The bigger corporations that I work for, they always like their 3-year and 5-year plan. And the only thing that did was satisfy people in the office hidden away, because they could project out and it looked good on paper, because they had always over project and
they want to know each quarter. They want to know the quarterly numbers.
Well, we
trading.
did, when you say 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, we always did it monthly. Okay, so but yes, personally, and especially in a startup mode, 1 year is plenty. If you can follow that and use it as a guide and refer back to it weekly, here's my sales, here's my expenses, am I on target? Because you're going to project out the sales for the month. Actually, you're projecting them out weekly, which equals the month. And if you can follow up with that and you review these figures on a weekly basis, and most companies do it on a Monday, and well, I'm not talking about having the P&L and the balance sheet and all that just yet. That will come, but you need to know your sales and how your projections are working.
Yeah, we do that weekly. Well, we obviously monthly, weekly, and we break it down by the crew. So the crew, all that comes to a total of the weekly sales, and then we all, and we incentivize them all around that. How do you validate the sales projections?
I'm not sure what you mean
How do you
by validate.
When you say, how do you?
Are you talking?
What's the point of doing them? Or what?
Well, okay, that's a good question, because depending person, company, owner, president, CEO, whatever, but again, we're talking startup. The word validate to me means if I'm doing these projections, I got to live by these projections. If I choose not, and a lot of startups don't want to sit down and be accountable. It's not something they want to do. They keep running like a bull in a china shop. But these projections and numbers, sales and expenses and expectations of sales is what's going to make the business go the first year. 40-50% of the businesses that start up fail, and it's not necessarily because it's really generally 40-50% fail because they don't have money to continue to go forward. They didn't lay that money out ahead of time or plan not to have that expenses, where the expenses eat up and they don't get the return on the sale.
Okay, what are some factors affecting the sales forecast? When you look at it, what's some
that's a real broad question, but if you're in retail, then it's going to be weather, it's going to be a fashion curve. If you're in, say you're in landscaping and doing that, it could also be affected by weather. If you're in snow removal, weather. If you're in fertilizing, it could be a price of fertilizer doubled because of this reason or another. But every business has what you just asked. Where's the hurdle going to come from? Where is what I would call a roadblock that I didn't anticipate? I've done all these things that we're talking about. All of a sudden, I've got a storm coming at me. You've got to learn to be a rainmaker. There you go.
Rainmaker. Just in our industry, is a good example. We've been right in the new home construction development market. It's been red hot. Obviously, people, you can't even list a house. People were on a weekend, getting 7-8 offers, and it bid it up crazy. Well, those times are coming to an end. So we look at what's the market look like? What's the interest rate going? It's going up. It'll probably be 7 by the end of the year. And what does that do? Is the prices on the materials coming down? For example, wood is, but some others are not. So all that comes because you at some point in there, if the prices don't come down and the interest rate goes up, you're pricing people out of the market that can't afford that house. And that's kind of what some of the numbers we look at. We also lean on our customers. They give us forecasts on what the industry looks like and what it's looking like for the coming year, what their plan is to do that. So we take all that into account. Anything else on sales projections?
Yeah, but
go ahead.
Pertaining to what you're saying, you didn't ask me a direct question, but when times we're working towards a tough government trying to slow the business down, raise the interest rates, and get inflation down.
It's transitory. That's transitory.
Transitory, and thank you. And I'm learning something here.
So they say it was.
Yes, okay. It's transitory. Okay. We learn new words here on this podcast also. But I've hit that wall not very often, but 3 or 4 times where we always used to say you give $1 away for 50 cents, you can't find the customer. And there's times when what you have to do is, in another analogy that, again, these are things you're not going to read about in a book or hear about in Wharton Business School, is that you got to work twice as hard to get half as much. And again, that creates rainmakers. You just can't take no for an answer. You got to keep plugging because it will come back. And the best and the smartest people look at the stock market today. The average person with 401s is down anywhere from 20 to 30% off of their peak. And we don't know what the trough is, and Jamie Dimon said today it's going to drop 20%. So if he says it, then everybody believes it's going to drop. So these are things that you can have the best sales projections to follow it, but you have to be nimble. And whether it's cutting back in help or slowing down advertising, cutting down on expenses, you got to find a way, and that's and those ways aren't the fun ways. But in order to survive a business, that's what has. And everybody goes to it. There's very few companies that just go straight up. And when it goes straight up, like the housing and everything, it's not gonna. If you built 50 houses last year, maybe this year coming up in 23, you're going to maybe do 25. That's a big adjustment. It's fun when the business is on fire. Everything seems to work well. But when you got to start tightening down, again, wrong choice of words, but it separates the men from the boys, we used to say. Now boys and girls, so to speak.
Okay, this could move on to inventory review. What are some of the important things to know about inventory?
Well, again, it depends on your business. If we're talking inventory and you're running a business that you're not selling inventory, but you need replenishment inventory to do your job, that's one thing. It's easier at this level to talk about you're buying inventory to sell. And you obviously you need startup inventory. You bought the inventory. Hopefully you get 30 or 60 days to pay for it. And a lot of startups you're paying cash for it to get the inventory on hand. There's going to be mistakes in your purchasing. The one thing you don't want to do, or an easy analogy as far as purchasing inventory, is figure out how many you think you can sell in a week or a month. And that projection may be fairly accurate or may not be accurate at all. But what is going to stop you if I'm in the bread business and I figure I can sell, 10 loaves of bread a month or week, and I can replenish that bread within the next week, I don't need to have 30 loaves on hand. Basically, what I want to do is keep turning my inventory based on the value of how fast I can get that inventory. And if I have to order less inventory more often, that's a better way to do it. And spending less but ordering more often will give you better cash flow and better turnover and better markup. Basically, if you're in a retail situation, the least you want to turn your inventory is 4 or 5 times a year. And if you're turning less than that, you're really having to add money in more money into the business. But if you're turning 5, 6, 8 times a year, which is very possible, you're buying product with the money that you sold the product. So you're constantly reusing the same dollar. And one thing, you got to base your inventory and your turnover on sales, which you can do weekly, and you don't want to have more than 12 weeks inventory. If you had 12 weeks inventory on hand, and that could be an exaggeration, maybe you only need 2 or 3. But if you have 12 weeks inventory, you want to turn that inventory in 12 weeks. That way you've got, a little over 4-time turn. But in today's world and how we're doing things and the way fashion and product is available, you need to be in the 5 to 6 time annual turn. And that way you're using the same amount of money and not having to go out and buy money.
Okay, I got another question here, but let me answer. I'm going to ask the question, I'm going to answer
Okay.
it, and you tell me how it makes sense to you.
Well, then I don't have to answer.
Well, you will have an. I'm pretty sure you'll have an answer. I'm just saying.
Okay.
What's the biggest challenges right now for inventory? So, in the past, what we've done is just in time. We have a lot of places here in town that they would hold the material. We need what we need for a week or two. We go pick it up, bring it over, and we'd use that. And then, we'd kind of go back and do the same thing, that. Well, after the pandemic, in between supply chain and labor issues, everything is slowed down. I mean, so you got to, personally, we look at it as we need to stock more stuff to be. Let me give you an example. We sweep streets in new developments, and to keep dirt and mud out of people's houses. Once it gets in the car, gets in the driveway, it gets in the house. So we're trying to use machines, skid loaders, just sweep streets, keep them clean. But that's a very high maintenance item. Has brushes. It has other parts that are moving all day long. So it's a very high maintenance item. So we got to change these brushes out. Earlier in the year, we bought 2 new modeled sweepers, and they're bigger. They work great and everything else. However, we ran into a problem where you can't get the parts. You just simply cannot get the parts. And it's not that it's a lack of them not having the parts. They don't have enough people to keep up with the demand on it. So we went back. We had some odor sweepers. You could get the parts for odor sweepers. So I looked across the country and bought a couple odor sweepers to go with what we have, so we could continue to sweep these streets. And now, because I'm afraid those parts might run out, we're going to hold more inventory of those parts so we can maintenance the items. We have one of our odor skid loaders sitting in our shop. It's been there for 10 months waiting on a wiring harness. A wiring harness is basically just the brains and make everything work. And the manufacturer is just still not got one of those harnesses out. So we're still sitting waiting on that. There's various other items that we use for inlet protection to keep sediment to get out of drains, that kind of thing. We got to hold more of that stuff because our local suppliers have a hard time keeping up with it. So we have just succumbed to, we've had a different reality of we're going to have more inventory on hand to keep the process moving. We never want to slow down a sale or let a customer be disappointed in that service. So we are having to find ways to hope. It's just we do cleaning too for new home construction. Same thing. I can't get rags to clean houses, so we're looking all over the internet for rags to clean houses. So it's just whatever you think you got one fixed, another one pops up. Kind of like the toilet paper. Is it toilet paper this week or is it Mr. Clean this week? So during the pandemic. So that's kind of what we've kind of rallied.
Go to Goodwill and get a lot of T-shirts over there cheap. But a good point you make. I've got similar views and some that aren't similar. When we're talking about inventory, shortage, etc. We always used to call it in the business I was in, right time, right price, right color, right size. That's kind of like the Ford mentality they started 20 years ago, where they need a fuel pump, and they didn't order that fuel pump till yesterday because they know they could get it today. So it was right time, right now. And what that did is control their cash flow. And they didn't necessarily want to stock anything because that's a broad example, but that they were well known for that, very successful.
I think Toyota's the one that started that, if I'm not
Was it
mistaken.
Toyota?
Yeah, they
Well,
started it.
You own a Ford, that's why I said that, because I know
I own a Toyota too.
it gets a reciprocal for that, I work for food, basically. So, the other thing is, inventory. There's a good marketing and approach on inventory, and I'm talking primarily from retail, whether it's cars, a good example, chips, or footwear, clothing, or whatever it might be, especially in the higher end. And it's since the beginning I've been in the business, almost. There's always been this creation of shortage that doesn't exist, and that creation of shortage makes people want the product more, willing to pay more, and it brings more emphasis to the product, and the customer wants to chase it, and the manufacturer is making money because they're always getting high margins and turning the product faster, and there's not really a shortage. I mean, and a good example of that retail business in the last couple of years is you didn't need to look to buy the product, and you could close your eyes and buy it, and it sold. And it sold for good margins. It was like it was free. Inventory was short. Anything people got their hands could get their hands on sold. And it wasn't as much as a shortage. It was somewhat of a shortage, but more of it came from just sales increasing faster than inventory could be supplied. And what happens at the retail level, and it happened similar to what you're saying, Kenny, is that, I can't take this emotionally, so I'm going to order 3 cases of Windex because we only need 1 for a week, but I can't get, and the price is going up, and that's the mentality. So it's an emotional thing. The biggest of corporations go through that. That's why there's companies called TJ Maxx, Ross, Marshalls, etc., because they're getting all the overflow of what's been overbought. And the best of companies have the best of software and algorithms to control this, but emotions overweigh this more times than not.
Okay, I have one final one here, Jerry. In the business, who should be doing the purchasing and how many?
Well, on startup, obviously the what I would call the startup, the owner is going to do the purchasing, and that depends based on the sales and turnover. That's the quick answer. As we get further into these podcasts, we'll talk about the algorithms of how to control the inventory, manage the inventory on a weekly basis, how to have a budget for the inventory, and how the inventory should, how you pay for it, how you turn it over, and your demands on certain margins. So, but at this case, on a startup case, it's going to be the manager or the owner, let's say, or the owner number 2, which may be a manager or maybe employee number 2 or 3. They're the ones closest to the firing line and the ones that have the most value to gain or to lose. It always should be discussed, monitored. It doesn't necessarily, the owner, he or she may be too emotional to do the buying, but basically that's where it's going to start. And it's not unusual for the owner to buy a lot of product that just doesn't sell, but that's how you learn. Everybody goes through it.
Okay, just a few things to clean up here. Just want to mention our sponsor, our one and only here, Humber Building Services, in the industry for building homes and developments and that kind of thing. Also want to mention that we had our 30-year anniversary party here for all the employees out here, and we had a great time. We gave away a bunch of prizes, and we had a bunch of bouncies for the kids, and it was a lot of good time and a lot of fun for everybody.
Anything for the adults?
Yeah, we had I made burgers and hot dogs, and we had food, and we gave away a TV and some gift cards, that kind of free vacation days and free tardy slips.
Yeah, tardy slips.
Yeah. So which you probably know all about.
Yeah,
so.
right.
Look for us on Facebook. Our executive producer Jacob Norris kind enough to set that up. Look for us at Rainmakers Business Startup. That correct, Jacob? Just
you might mention some of the sites we're going to be on too.
Instagram. I think we're going to be doing
Facebook, Spotify,
that.
Amazon.
Yeah. So we're starting to kind of get into the next growth area. Again, if we're not growing,
we're startup.
We're dying.
We're startup.
So
we need the money, believe me. Yeah.
So anyway, hit that subscribe button.
Yeah.
And we appreciate your time, and we hope to see you here next week. Jerry's got a bunch of hot topics he wants to go over.
Yeah, you're really going to enjoy next week. Arrivederci.
Take
Take
care.
what you like, leave the rest.